list, and that is the Seattle Seahawks. They went 9-8 last year. Unfortunately, did not make the playoffs. They were one of those teams that were in the hunt late in the year, and I have to pull up the schedule, but if I remember correctly, they kind of faltered at the end of the season as well. But in terms of who they lost, they kind of went through a reload, restructure, wherever you want to call it, as they let go of head coach Pete Carroll. Or I don't know if it's, I forget. I think the technical term is he's no longer head coach, but he's like an advisor. But nonetheless, not the head coach. So that's big. Obviously, quarterback Drew Lock, who was a good backup for them. A couple of linemen and left tackle Jason Peters and guard Damian Lewis. Also center Evan Brown. And then on defense, lost linebacker Jordan Brooks, safeties Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams. And if I believe correctly, too, they also technically lost Bobby Wagner. Sorry, Bobby Wagner was there last year, and then he left in free agency. And then in terms of additions, they brought in head coach Mike Macdonald, former Ravens defensive coordinator. So we'll see if he can translate his success from Baltimore over to Seattle. Also brought in quarterback Sam Howell to fill in that backup spot. Added some insurance on the offensive line with offensive tackle George Fant and guard Laken Tomlinson. And then on defense, brought in some reinforcements with defensive tackle Jonathan Hankins, linebacker Jerome Baker, and safeties Rayshawn Jenkins and Kevon Wallace. And then via the draft, they grabbed in the first round defensive lineman Byron Murphy out of Texas, so adding more defense for Mike Macdonald, and then guard Christian Hayes out of UConn in the third round. So new look for the Seahawks, obviously with a new head coach, and obviously letting a couple of vets go. So what are your thoughts on the Seahawks and how this new regime will play out in the first season?
I'm actually really excited for Seattle this season for a few key reasons. Obviously, with the offense, all the skill positions largely the same, so we don't need to go too long on that. The only thing that I am really looking forward to this year is, do we see more of a takeover from Jackson Smith and Jigba on some of the reps that maybe Tyler Lockett has kind of historically held for so long? As Lockett is sort of getting older, Jackson Smith and Jigba, starting to come into his own. Does he start to kind of eat into that workload and become maybe a key difference maker for the Seattle, receiver room? I'm interested to see, does that happen? Also, do we maybe get a little bit more Zach Charbonnet this year? He really wasn't much of a factor last season outside of one or two games where I think Kenneth Walker had missed some time. But can that become the true 1-2 punch that they envisioned when they drafted him? That's something interesting to see. But for the offense, the thing I'm the most excited about is actually the offensive line. I love the addition of Laken Tomlinson. He's been a key contributor at the guard spot on all of the teams he's played for, whether that be the Niners, the Jets, some of these different teams. You obviously have your two young tackles in Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas. We're just hoping for health at that spot for those two guys. You bring in Connor Williams at center, who, when he played for the Cowboys at guard, wasn't a fan of him, but now that he's at center, he kind of found that spot in Miami. I think that that's really become a spot that he's actually started to excel at, because I think that the biggest issue that he always had was kind of the strength and getting bullied. He doesn't really have one-on-one matchups in which he's going against straight nose tackles like that anymore when he's the center spot as opposed to a guard, because he can often be the guy who's kind of helping with the guards. So I really like the addition of getting him at center, because he was actually solid for Miami there. So it feels like the offensive line, what previously was a weakness throughout the entire Russell Wilson era, has now quickly become a strength for the new look Seahawks. And with all of those skill players, the receiver room they have, Kenneth Walker, Charbonnet, I'm really excited to see how they look and Geno Smith looks behind this offensive line, because I do think that they could be really good, honestly. And I think that this offensive line, especially the Laken Tomlinson edition, can be really good specifically on the ground game, because that's where he's kind of thrived throughout the years, is creating these holes for his running backs. So that excites me. And then the flip side on the defense, it's the same thing, but with the defensive line. All of a sudden, what, previously, which during the Legion of Boom era, they did have a really strong defensive line, but then that kind of faded away and they never really got back to that. all of a sudden now we have Jaron Reed, and it wasn't for a lack of trying because they did invest, decently heavily at the defensive line, including guys like Jaron Reed. But we've got Jaron Reed, we've got Jonathan Hankins, who's a huge force when it comes to just trying to plug holes and be a presence in the run game. He was great for Dallas. You've got Leonard Williams, who they traded for, and he's a stud. And then you add in Byron Murphy to the rotation of that defensive line. Like that feels like a true strength and anchor point that the Seattle Seahawks defense can actually truly rely on, where this defensive line can now be a force at stopping the run. And, with a guy like Leonard Williams, you could definitely get pressure after that quarterback. So I'm a big fan of what Seattle has done in the trenches, and I really do like the sort of rekeying of this franchise towards those two areas, considering that for quite a while under Pete Carroll, he was obviously a great coach, one of the greatest of all time, Hall of Famer, all that kind of stuff. But at the handful of years towards the end of his tenure there, they just seemed to not really invest or hit when they were trying to invest in the trenches. So I like the additions they've had, and I really do feel like the Seattle team could definitely make some noise this year. It just sort of depends on health, because last year it definitely felt like they were a little bit better than they showed. But they just had some key injuries, at the tackle spots, and, some injuries at the running back spots that kind of held them back a little bit. So I'm excited for what Seattle can potentially do this season.
Yeah. I want to build off what you mentioned on the defense too. Like you alluded to, like even depth is pretty solid as well, which was a big thing for the Legion of Boom. Not saying that they will be, but big key point for any defense. I mean, even on the edge, Draymond Jones is solid. Boya Mafe is a good athlete. So maybe, now that they got more big people in terms of Reed, Hankins, Williams, Byron Murphy, he can maybe, guys like him and Draymond Jones can just focus, line up a little bit wider, just focus on being a pure pass rusher and, giving tackles some stressing points there. And I think too, though, especially getting those big guys is really good for their division, because last year they did struggle against their division. And when you think about it, the kings of their division, LA Rams, San Francisco 49ers, they want to run the ball. That's what their offenses are. The run sets up a lot for them. So it'll be very interesting to see how they fare against those squads this year, because last year, part of the reason why they kind of fell off towards the latter half of the season was they did not have a good November outside of beating the Commanders by 3, which even then that's not really an accomplishment for the last year. But then they lost to the Rams, the Niners twice, and then also your Dallas Cowboys as well. And all those games pretty high scoring. And so hopefully with these additions, they can slow down the run. We know that their corners are talented. We saw Witherspoon pop a bit last year. Was a bit of a down year for Rick Woolen. Maybe he bounces back with this new system, and we'll see how the addition of Rayshon Jenkins and then making Julian Love the other safety as well fares for the Seahawks defense. Hopefully they won't be giving up 30, 40 plus points like they were in that stretch that I mentioned. And we'll see how the offensive line depth is. I'm still concerned in regards to the tackles' health, because Cross has been solid, but Abraham Lucas, especially last year, was probably a reason why they had trouble at times. But he was, as any Seahawks fan will probably know, dealing with injuries for the most of last year too. If I remember correctly, he only played a handful of games. So, and as of right now, in their unofficial depth chart, they list him as 4th. So I'm assuming he's still dealing with some sort of injury, as they have George Fant there. But we'll see we'll see how this new regime kind of looks and how they play things too, because it is like you said, talented receiver room. We know they got talent in the running back room. Geno Smith's solid. Heck, even if he goes down, we saw Sam Howell can be operable at quarterback. So the big question is obviously how good that defense is, but also can this offense finally kind of live up to the potential of the talent that's been put there. So we'll see how that all fares out for the Seahawks and Mike Macdonald. But it'll be very interesting to see if, like I said, if his success will translate over to Seattle scheme wise, because kind of took the league by storm last year with that Ravens defense. So